Hey everyone, this is Jesse from the Janjo Zone in another dual sauce extra sauce. Yeah, that's what I'm calling this side series to my normal Yu-Gi-Oh history. This is the extra sauce. This is kind of whatever I feel like doing. It could be a bunch of stuff, mostly older formats at the moment, because that's what I seem to be more interested in talking about. What I really want to talk about is more Yugi Kaiba format. So if you want to see more videos of this format, then please leave a like and a comment to let me know what you want to see. So the Yugi Kaiba format of 2002 is one of my favorite formats. Not only is it nostalgic as all hell, but the level of play required is something else. Unlike combo heavy decks of the modern era or even the hand control of 2003, 2002 Yu-Gi-Oh had a very limited card pool with one booster pack and two starter decks. That was it. So the cream rose to the top and the competitive scene on the outside looks the same in every deck. But with such monotony led each individual player to playing their own style, their own game ethics for what cards were superior to others. While Beatdown was, and still, is the best deck, everyone's deck looks different, whether it included Last Will, or more defensive cards, or more back row control. There are even a couple alternative decks that see play from time to time, like Dragons or Soul Control. But with all the best decks running rampant, meta changes and innovations do happen. Some innovative decks do arise, whether good or bad or just fun. So in this video, I want to take a look at the top 5 spiciest decks of the Yugi Kaiba format. Let's jump into it. So the first I want to talk about is back row control. This deck I found by Sam Cox, which is a fantastic old school Yu-Gi-Oh player. He's also on Team Bropire, so check that channel out. So back row control is pretty interesting because most of the decks you see competitively are very beat down decks, whether it is like a Lojin or a Blue Eyes or some sort of defensive stall with Giant Soldier Stone or Mystical Elf. The back row control kind of takes a different step at this, and it takes a lot of the weaker monsters, but a lot of these tend to control your opponent's back row because back row is very important in this game. There's a lot of mind games in the 2002 format. If what they have face down is a Trap Hole or a Wabaku, or it could even be a spell. They could be placing a spell just to trick you to using your Trap Master on, or to prevent you from thinking about summoning a stronger monster like a Summon Skull. So back row control is the answer to this. It plays a lot of cards like Arm Ninja, Trap Master, the Stern Mystic to flip cards, D-Spell. So you always have options to destroy your opponent's back row. So if you have a Trap Master and you find out they have a spell card, well then you can just use D-Spell to get rid of that. Or you have Arm Ninja as a backup to that if you miss with Trap Master. It's a very interesting deck in that regard because you clean up the back row, so it lets you be able to summon for free your beaters like Lojin or Battle Ox. So it's very interesting. I haven't really tried out myself that much, but it's definitely something that can work. And it's weird because you look at it and it doesn't look like it would work, but when you stop and think about it, yeah, it kind of does, and that's pretty spicy. So number 4 is Fiend Equip. This deck is a bit more common than probably all the other ones on this list. This is probably up there with Dragons or playing Exodia, if anyone runs that. But Fiend Equip is really interesting. It takes a different style approach to the beatdown format by using a lot of equip cards, because there's a good amount of equip cards in 2002 format, and a lot of them are very splashable with a lot of great monsters. So Fiend Equip, as it sounds, it used a lot of not only Fiend monsters, but Dark monsters, because you got the 2 equip cards in Sword of Dark Destruction and Dark Energy. So you can equip these 2 cards like Lojin, but then you got a bit weaker monsters, but still pretty respectable once they're equipped, like Man-Eating Treasure Chest and Rikishin Powered, which I absolutely love because, one, I love Rikishin Power's card design. I've always loved the look of it. I think it always looks really cool, just this big pink gargoyle monster. And Baron the Fiend Sword is also in the deck, which, fun fact, is the card I used to win my very first Yu-Gi-Oh duel. My opponent accidentally summoned Cocoon of Evolution in attack mode and didn't have enough life points left to survive my Baron. So yeah, that card holds a special place in my heart for that. As you can tell, when I saw this deck existed, I absolutely loved it because you have all these cards I love and they're actually usable and in a different way than Beatdown. And I am, I'm a hipster, I like more obscure things like that. And to see something that's not just, beatdown, 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 or just soul control, beatdown, beatdown, I really, really love that. And, I can't wait to see more innovations from Fiend Equip decks, or really other Equip decks have a lot of potential, I think, and some other decks that I love to talk about more in depth someday if I ever make a, top 10 2002 casual decks or something along those lines, something really bizarre. But for what it's worth, Fiend Equip, great. Wait, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, because that helps me upload more videos and know that you like content like this. So number 3 is a deck of my own creation. This one I'm actually really proud of for figuring out that absolutely no one else I know plays, and that is an Umi Beatdown deck. Now I know I wanted to stray away from Beatdown because that's not really spicy, it's not really different, but Umi Beatdown is a whole other beast, because what this deck mainly uses is 2 specific cards. That is Yumi and Great White. Now, field spells are kind of weird in 2002 because you don't really see it that often. Sometimes you'll see it from newer players, or maybe like a side deck, or some kind of weird one-of spice with Yami, or maybe sometimes Sogen. But Umi, I think, is really good because while Yami is good for what it does, it boosts up your monsters like Law Jin or Summon Skull. It also affects all cards on the field, so your opponent gets these buffs too. What Yumi does is increases water monsters. Now, no one plays water monsters in this format, so if you're the only one playing this specific type of card with a 99% chance your opponent isn't running it, or probably 75% they're not running a field spell to counteract that, because it's the old school format, so it would destroy it if you're running that master rule. With Yumi is that it'll give your Great White an increase, and you don't have to worry about your opponent getting any increases. Now, Great White is the strongest monster that fits this bill for Umi, and with 1600 attack, it's still pretty respectable because a lot of people run Giant Soldier Stone for when you summon it, you can still poke for 1300 if you don't have any. You could do the same thing with Great White. And at 1600 attacks, that's 300 more. That's even more dangerous, and you pass monsters, up to that defense. With Giant Soldier Stone, you have the option to place in defense mode. Great White, you don't have that, but you get the trade-off with the boost from Yumi. So when Yumi's on the field, your Great White all of a sudden becomes 1800. That's Law Jin levels, and that's pretty scary. So you have this monster that your opponent is more likely to use a trap hole on than they would with the Giant Soldier of Stone. And then you have all your other beaters like Battle Locks and the Magical Swordsman, plus Law Jin, obviously. So you have all these beaters, and you just have 3 more than your opponent does. Already running 9 is a pretty good amount, but when you have that additional 3 and more cards to make your opponent waste resources, all of a sudden you're looking at something that's pretty scary. I think there's definitely a lot of potential here, and I feel like I've uncovered this gold mine that no one's really seen yet, because I think it's going to be really good for a while until people start citing more field spell cards, or people playing more Great Whites, or hell, they could even side Great Whites if they anticipate your opponent playing Umi. But for right now, it's a unique spice that I think has a lot of benefits too, and I think is incredibly spicy. So the next deck I want to talk about, I want to first mention about the Smokescreen decks. This is actually a more recent, as of 2020, a more very recent change in the meta for 2002, because yeah, there's actually change in metas. There are cards that get more popular, cards that get less popular. It's actually really interesting to see how this format changes and adapts, because it does. Quite frankly, it absolutely does. If you look at a lot of the decks, some decks run different cards. And what's interesting about the 2002 format is that actually Curse of Yu-Gi-Oh!, another fantastic YouTuber which you definitely subscribe to, talked about the side deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! And just how interesting and different it is, because normal in side decks you side deck for matchups. You know, in modern Yu-Gi-Ohs, you have a lot of hand traps and that sort of stuff. You want to side out, you know, cards to shut down certain other cards. But in the classic old school 2002 Yu-Gi-Oh, most of the side deck is more so for how your opponent plays. Sure, there are side deck cards for matchups like Dragon Capture Jar for dragons, or card destruction for Exodia, or stop defense for stalled decks, but generally you do have a lot of, okay, is your opponent playing this? Because as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, a lot of decks are very similar with a couple of changes now and again, so it's not like you're sighting out for every possible deck because most of the decks are the same. What has changed with this as well in 2002 is that you have a lot of these decks that are smokescreen decks, is the term for it, where they know your opponent wants to side out for something, so you're going to side out your entire strategy for something else that they're not expecting. It's side deck mind games here, and I know there is some of that in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but I don't feel like it's to this degree. This degree is pretty high. So you can have decks that are defensive burn decks, so your opponent's going to side in cards like Stop Defense. So what you do is that you side deck into dragons, and all of a sudden your opponent doesn't have the resources to take care of them. My favorite instance of the Smokescreen deck is the Exodia Smokescreen deck. This one, you have a fairly balanced deck. You have a little bit of defense, a little bit of soul control, a little bit of burn, a little bit this and that in the main deck. Now obviously it's kind of be whatever you want it to be, but what's important is the side deck is Exodia. So normally your opponent would side deck the card destruction or not expect any Exodia related things. So if you win the first round, which, you know, if you're lucky enough to do, then you can use Exodia in the second game to just win it outright, and your opponent could have no response to that. Now this could be something that you could wait till game 3 if you lose one of the games as well. Or you can switch out the game 3 if it didn't go so well in the second game. So then your opponent is expecting Exodia again, but then all of a sudden, like, nope, I'm done with Exodia. It's a very, very spicy way to win the game, to sneak a victory upon your opponent. And I really love these Smokescreen strategies. I think they're really crazy to think about. Again, you can have different things like a stall Smokescreen, where you have a bunch of stall cards to deck out your opponent. So then you have a bunch of stop defense cards from your opponent that they side in that are useless if you swap out to a beatdown strategy. And it's absolutely crazy. And of all these Smokescreen decks, the Exodia one definitely impressed me the most. And it's crazy to think about just how many decks have been doing the Smokescreen strategy recently. And I think that's kind of neat, I think. So before we get to number 1, there is one deck I want to talk about briefly as an honorable mention, and that is Gaia the Fierce Knight. Yeah, fusions don't really see much play in these, but Gaia is kind of interesting because it's a bit of a dragon deck, bit of a soul control, and a bit of a fusion deck, and I think it's really cool for it can do a lot, because Gaia the Dragon Champion is by far the most powerful fusion monster in the game at this current point. And then you have cards like Curse of Dragon, which is a 1 tribute dragon that you can use for your opponent when you use soul control. So you use a lot of your kind of beatdown strategies and then save them towards the end. Some of this really big beefy monster, and that's really cool. I haven't really seen much from this deck, but there's definitely potential there for the spice to get even spicier. Now for number 1, we have a deck by John Gregory, and this is the Metal Dragon Turbo. I love this deck. This deck is incredibly spicy. There's definitely a high level of skill required to play this deck, and it uses a monster that you probably wouldn't see otherwise, and that's Metal Dragon. So what this deck is like Gaia the Fierce Knight, this is a fusion-based deck where you use a lot of your beaters to whittle down your opponent until they don't really have much resources left, like Wall of Illusion, Fissure, that kind of stuff. And then you summon your Metal Dragon, which is the other strongest fusion monster in the game. It's not quite anywhere near the level of Gaia, but certainly much stronger than any of the other lower monsters. Plus, it's higher than Law Jin, so it can still beat over most cards. So what Metal Dragon does differently is that it has a lot less bricks, I would argue, than Gaia the Fierce Knight or Curse of Dragon, but it does have some of its own weird cards, like Steel Ogre Grotto number 1, I believe it is, which I've actually talked about in my top 10 normal monster Blue Eyes video, which I did mention this deck in, where you use Soul Exchange to tribute your opponent's monsters to set your Ogre Grotto, so you have a defensive wall there that gets rid of your opponent's monsters. You can hold on to it for the fusion play. Now, the worst card you have in your deck is Lesser Dragon, but he is summonable with Last Will, so you have that going for you. And he also protects some of your other monsters with, if your opponent has a Fissure, he protects your Lodging, so that's great. You can also have Reaper of the Cards in there too, which also, like Trap Master, gets rid of trap cards. So you have your opponent playing this guessing game. Okay, do I flip the Ogre Grotto or do I flip the Reaper of the Cards? I don't know which one it is. So you have definitely a lot of different plays, whether it's defensively or offensively with this. I'm unsure if I like the Gaia deck better, but the fact that you can use Metal Dragon in a format is absolutely nuts. And this is by far, I think, the most innovative deck I've seen in this format. As you've seen throughout this video, there's a lot of crazy innovative decks, from Smokescreen to Umi to back row control, but this Metal Dragon Turbo is really interesting. It has won games, and I'm interested to see how many people play it, because again, there's a very high skill level required to run this deck, to know when to play what cards, when to hold on. It's really interesting. It's super spicy and perfect to fit number 1 on this list for sure. So let me know what you think about this video. You want to see more 2002 Yugi Kaiba format content or other specific formats to me to cover for decks like Metal Raiders or etc. Let me know in the comments below or on Twitter at Janjo Zone. I also have a Discord which I upload a lot of these crazy decks in, which you can find a link to that in the description below. Yeah, let me know what other kind of content you want to see on this channel. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, because that lets me know you like this kind of stuff and lets me want to do more of it, which obviously I do. So, of course, until then, have a wonderful day.